Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for another installment of our webinar series. Today was a continuation from 2 weeks ago. We're back with part 2 of our cybersecurity horror stories. Before we get started, I just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. We will be recording this webinar and posting it on our website like we do with all of the others. So if you'd like to rewatch, or you have a colleague or coworker or even a friend that may find this interesting, we make sure we send a link out to all the attendees for where we post this on our website. Normally it takes us about a day or so to get it uploaded and pushed up to the website, but that will be going there. All the mics are muted. We will be taking Q&A through the Q&A panel. We will not be monitoring that live today, but we will review the Q&A panel at the end of the webinar and do our best to answer any questions. I also do reserve a good half hour, 45 minutes after these webinars to be available for email questions or phone calls if you have a specific instance that you'd like to talk about or something that you'd want to go over that's specific to your company. I certainly try to make myself available for that. This is going to be a live demo, and I do have a live guest with me, so please bear with us. If we run into any technical snags or challenges, we'll push through them, but this is live, so just a heads up. And so with that, we'll go ahead and dive in and talk about our agenda for the day. So we'll start off with kind of a review of last time, talk about the business email compromises we heard about, and then the ransomware crypto wall stories that were related to us last time. And then I have Josh Gembala, from our manager of our Enhanced Security Services division, here with me today. He'll be talking about some real life horror stories that he and his team have seen and are currently seeing. And then we'll touch on briefly just some of the methods and methodologies to protect your business from some of the things we discuss. So let's just start with kind of a review of last time. We had a couple of recorded guests on. They were kind enough to sit with our CEO, Mike Maddox, for our Bottom Line IT podcast with the Michigan Business Network. Those are available on the Michigan Business Network if you'd like to watch the entire podcast or listen to the entire podcast, not just the snippets that I played last week. But we did hear from an organization down in Constantine, Michigan, that had a nefarious actor in their email for what appeared to be months at the end of all of this. So after they looked back through and dug themselves out of the hole, and it found out that they really had 5 or 6 months worth of things to go back and review, changes that they had made. There were some wiring instructions that were changed to some of their major vendors, that they wired money to people that weren't the vendor. Also, we heard from another company, actually in Grand Ledge, Michigan, where they had multiple ransomware and crypto wall events, starting back in 2015, 2016. I believe the interview started with them saying, "Wait, we had to go back to our timeline of incidents to find out where this all began." And they talked through the horrors of one machine becoming infected and people not being able to get to their files, and by the time they went and got to that machine, the infection had spread to 3 others, and now they're trying to get all these machines off the network, find out who's been infected, who hasn't, having to keep all these computers off of the network because anytime they remediated on one machine and put it back on the network, it spread from an infected machine back to that one machine they just cleaned up. It was a mess. It was a nightmare for them, and they were able to solve that with a live monitoring service. In fact, they shared with us last week that they most recent attempt at an incident where one computer got an infection, an alert was generated almost immediately. Within 4 minutes, they were aware that machine had been infected. That machine had already been isolated, and they were able to, at their leisure, go grab that machine, clean it up, remove the infection, and that was the end of it. They didn't have it spreading throughout their network. They weren't playing that horrible game of whack-a-mole from the carnival. So those are some of the things that we went through and went over last week. And business email compromise and ransomware are still 2 of the largest threats that are out there today. But now I'd like to introduce Josh Gembala, our director of our Enhanced Security Services Division, and he's going to share with us some real-life horror stories that he and his team are experiencing. And for some reason, I cannot unmute Josh.
There we go.
Josh got himself unmuted. Wonderful. Thank you for joining me, Josh.
Yeah, no problem. So sorry if you hear noises in the background. It's not Halloween sound effects. I have two 4-month-old puppies upstairs that are very unhappy that Dad kicked them out of the office. So hopefully they will keep the howling to a minimum. So hey, Kevin, thanks for having me.
Home, right, Josh?
What was that?
the trials and tribulations of working from home, right, Josh?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I have a fancy new office, but you know, it's not soundproof. So.
All right. Well, you and your team look like you've come up with quite a number of stories here, and I have to admit I'm fairly amused with your naming conventions here. It looks like you've named these after some real life horror stories.
Yeah. So the first one I wanted to tell you guys about is Frank and Becky. So Frank and Becky started out with a phishing email, we thought. This was a phishing email. As some of you may know, Becky is a security analyst that works at ASK, and she reviews submitted phishing emails. And in this case, she had received one of those emails from a customer. And in the email, it was asking the customer to change a vendor's payment method and to make a payment of a few $1,000s. The customer was rightfully suspicious of this email and had sent it over. And looking at the email, there wasn't anything that stood out to her other than it seemed like it was wrong, but the metadata, or in this case, the email header and the other components of the email itself, they were all right. They looked good. There wasn't any issue with them. So no like immediate red flags. She still wrote it up and sent an email to the customer and said, no, this doesn't look right. We need to follow up on this more. And actually, while she was typing that email to the customer made a great decision, and they called the vendor and asked them if it was a legitimate email. And the vendor told them, absolutely not. That is not legitimate. That was not from us. So Becky sends the email and gets a call from the customer, and they share this information that they got from the vendor. And our first thought is, okay, the vendor has a business email compromise and is sending these out. Because the email was actually that good that we thought that the vendor was the one that was compromised. But we're also in cybersecurity, so we're paranoid of everything. And our due diligence was to start reviewing the logs for our customer to make sure that the issue wasn't on their side. And lo and behold, we take a look at these logs, and there are a bunch of successful international logins to the customer's mailbox.
Oh, wow. And I'm safe to assume this is not an international company. There's no reason that somebody internationally should be logging into this mailbox.
Not that has a presence in one of these countries, no.
Oh, fair enough.
So we know now that at least the customer is compromised. That doesn't mean that the vendor isn't as well, but we know the customer is. So we go through our normal process. We lock out the account. Becky starts reviewing the emails. We're going through logs. And really strange, but there is this unread email in the customer's inbox from Becky. But it's not an email that Becky sent. It has her email signature. It came from her, but it actually tells the customer that, you know, oh yeah, we received your phishing email. It's perfectly fine. That's totally legitimate. Go ahead and pay that invoice. We're like, what is going on? Why does the customer have an email from Becky that says, well, as we started to look further into it, what the attacker was doing is they were taking emails the customer had received. So Becky had sent the email telling her this looks like phishing. They got to that email before the customer did. put another copy of the email in there with the Becky's email signature, saying that it was actually legitimate. And we're pretty positive that that's what they did with the first email too. The first email started as a legitimate invoice from the vendor that they then took and added the request to change the payment method and change the payment date on. So they were actually sitting in the mailbox, actively monitoring the emails while we were working the incident and while the customer was receiving emails.
Oh, wow. So this truly was a man in the mailbox.
Yeah,
they were actively in the mailbox while you were investigating.
Yeah, and I know you and I talked about this incident later. So that's where, you know, we get the name Frank and Becky. So, you know, or evil Becky, what not Becky, you know, was dropping these bad advice emails in the customer's mailbox while we were, you know, working on the security incident, you know, behind the scenes. One thing I didn't you know, have in my notes, or that we didn't talk about earlier, but the follow-up to this was the same people then took and started emailing other people in the company, pretending to be the lady they first compromised. So they weren't happy that they got kicked out of the mailbox, and we're going to make a second attempt at it.
Oh, wow. Wow. So they were just relentless on that one. They, you know, you got us, you locked us out of this one. We're going to find another way in.
Yeah, it's the first time we've ever seen them impersonate, you know, the one of us, or the, you know, security team during an incident. So that was a good one.
Wow. Wow. That's a very unique one, Josh. I'm glad you haven't had a number like that.
Yeah. I hope everyone followed along with it. There was a lot of customer and vendor back and forth. So.
Yeah. Wow. Well. All right. Well, looks like the next one on your list is Firewall Rule Cemetery, huh? Why don't you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah. Where good firewall rules go afterwards. So in spring of 2017, so this one's a little older. All of us were really paying close attention to the WannaCry ransomware saga. I don't know if you guys remember that, but it was a pretty big deal. And if you're not familiar with the story, the short version of it is a hacker group called Shadow Brokers. They announced that they had stolen the toolkit of another hacker group called the Equation Group. Basically their exploits and other tools, that they had them in their possession. They originally started looking for some money for them, but eventually would just dump them to the internet. And the Equation Group was thought to be the NSA and later confirmed to be the NSA. So the national, so U.S. government essentially.
Wow, so that was quite a powerful toolkit that they had gained access to then.
Yeah, and it was kind of interesting because I think that the belief is that they had left it on a box that they had exploited, or some type of staging. They had left it unsecured, and that's how the guy got them.
Wow.
And really the best exploit in all of it was one called Eternal Blue. And this was a Windows SMBv1 protocol vulnerability or exploit. And the interesting thing about it was that really when this happened even, I mean, it was not considered best practice. It was considered a definite no-no to put SMBv1 on the public internet, to expose that from one of your servers to the public internet. That was not something that you would want to do.
And Josh, just for the layman on the call, SMBv1?
Yeah, so it's basically the underlying, we'll say the underlying mechanism how Windows file share works.
Okay.
So it's what lets you take files from your workstation and easily share them back and forth with other, you know, with the server that you're connecting to.
Okay.
So should not have SMBv1 on public internet, but you know, things fall through the cracks. You know, someone is testing something and creates a NAT rule instead of a port forward, and then it goes into production, and now you have a one-to-one to a box that has SMBv1. So basically, when I say a one-to-one or one-to-one NAT, like a mirror that are a pipe that lets communication from the internet go directly to the device inside of your network.
And not being controlled or blocked in any way by the firewall, just
Right.
an open connection between the two.
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
Yep. So about a month afterwards, there was a ransomware attack that used the Eternal Blue exploit called WannaCry. And it actually took down or impacted some really large organizations. So it pretty much took down the UK National Health Service, the NHS. It impacted FedEx, it impacted Nissan, it impacted a very large shipping company. It was definitely a big deal when it happened. Well, my introduction to the Eternal Blue exploit happened post WannaCry with another type of ransomware. So we were doing an audit of an environment, and there was a firewall rule that we didn't think looked like it should have been there anymore. But we were able to actually communicate with something inside the environment. And then when we look closer, what we realized is that the firewall rule was legacy, and that there was a old legacy small business server, Windows small business server, that had been left on a hypervisor on like a VMware environment. And they potentially needed to go back and get data from it. So they had just shut it down rather than removing it or disabling its NIC or anything like that. And then someone wanted data from it, so they spun it back up. And effectively what they did is they created a connection using that legacy firewall rule to this old server that was sitting on the VMware host. And when we started looking at the logs for this, the only thing that was stopping it from being exploited by this vulnerability was the Windows firewall still being enabled on the box.
Oh, wow. So this old legacy machine was turned back on to gather some old data from it. They forgot to turn it off.
Yep.
But luckily for them, when they turned it on, the Windows firewall was still enabled.
Yep.
And that was the only thing protecting their entire environment from being exploited through this.
As far as we could tell, yeah, that was all that stood between them and the outside world at that point, was just that Windows firewall.
Wow. Honestly, Josh, I think this is the first story I've heard of somebody being saved by the Windows firewall.
Well, it doesn't just happen to Windows servers, though. So I've told you this story before, but we had another incident that we looked at where a legacy firewall rule had originally been set up and had a legitimate business use. So again, a one-to-one NAT had been created in the firewall. That legitimate business use ended, so they decommed the device that was in the environment, but the rule was still in place. And then they hired a third-party company to come and install a new multifunction printer. And they gave the IP address of that multifunction printer, or of that old decommissioned device, to that multifunction printer. And the firewall rule was still in. So they plugged it in and then put the IP address into it. And then while the guy was working on getting the thing set up, he lost the ability to log into it anymore. And what ended up happening was, in that amount of time, someone found it and changed the default username and password on the multifunction printer, locking them out of the brand new, multi-$1,000 device. And the vendor ended up having to take it back and bring them a new one.
Oh, wow. Just couple minutes while the guy was configuring and setting it up, somebody accessed it and locked him out.
Yep. I mean, that's all they did was change that, but still, you don't want to stick to more vulnerable devices behind a NAT rule for sure.
No, certainly. Wow, that just shows how prevalent this is and how quickly people can strike. I mean, that machine was on the network for what, 15 minutes maybe?
Yeah, I don't know what the actual time frame was, but it was not long. And it's more of just making sure that if you want to know how you remediate these things, or is obviously if you're gonna decom something, and we all do this, you're like, okay, I'm gonna decommission the server, and I'll go back and do the firewall rule at this time, or I'm just gonna leave that there temporarily, and then life happens, work happens, and 3
Temporarily
years
becomes
later,
permanently.
yeah, 3 years later, and that NAT rule is still hanging out. Um, it definitely happens.
Gotcha. This is why you put together a thorough project plan and follow it, right, Josh?
Yep, kill those legacy firewall rules for sure.
Gotcha. Wow. All right. Well, let's move on then. So tell me about the Telltale Dropbox.
Yeah. So this one is a little shorter, but it kind of deals with, I don't know if you've heard the term like shadow IT, or in this case, everyone's had this happen in their environment. IT is busy, and some other department or some individual has a problem and they need that problem solved, and they go out and they download some free piece of software to solve their problem, or sign up for an account for something to solve their problem, and then they use it and forget about it. That's the end.
Mhm.
Well, in this case, we had a user that fell for a phishing email, and they put their credentials into it, and we knew that they did this. They did it and realized they did it and contacted us, and so we changed that username and password for them, or changed that password. But the thing was is that they were reusing the same credentials for a Dropbox account, and that they had completely set up. I mean, it was completely configured. They had gone through a lot of trouble to configure it when they were using it, and someone found that and logged in using those credentials at a later time, and then sent emails out to a bunch of their clients with links that gave to download a PDF document, which then took them to a malicious website.
Oh no. So basically, clients of this customer or this person got an email with a link to a known malware site, or malware would have been loaded on their machine.
Yeah.
Had they clicked on the link.
Yeah, and I think they ended up, I think it was 13 or 17 companies were affected by it in the end.
Oh no. So this just spiraled very quickly. One compromise then all of a sudden led to the compromise of a dozen others.
Yeah, and I mean, we told that the guy, look, if you're reusing this password, you need to change it at any of those other places, but he had completely forgot about the Dropbox account.
Gotcha.
And it was a great campaign because they were, basically an authenticated user using a compromised Dropbox to send out really good material.
Yeah, you said that this Dropbox was fully set up, so it was branded and everything for the company that this person worked for, so it looked very legitimate. And then again, they sent out these messages to known contacts of this company, so it was not uncommon for the folks to be receiving it. Wow, that is a good one. My goodness. Okay, so pay attention to those third-party softwares that you use and uninstall them when you're done.
Yes. Yep. Yep. That, or stick to the the stack that you're already, the application stack you're using. Use the approved stuff. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I have to admit I'm fairly curious about this next one, the website next door. I'm interested to hear about this one, Josh.
Well, depending on where some of our visitors or attendees are from, they may have actually seen this one in the Lansing News. But it's not just things like Dropbox where, when you forget about them, bad things can happen. A community in the Lansing area had set up a website for a certain population in the area to find out and register for events. And they had a web developer do it. And then when the web developer was done, he was effectively done. There wasn't anyone to maintain it. And at some point, so I believe that they may have been doing some minor updates, for the events to the site. But we believe at some point someone didn't have their credentials anymore, so they used cPanel, which is just a website kind of hosting platform, in order to create a FTP account on there. that had either default or very easy credentials, and they didn't change them. They left them like that. And an attacker found it, and they replaced the code with a redirect that took anyone that visited the website to a pay adult website. And
oh no, so this is like a community website where you'd go to find out at events in your community. And
yeah, let's say things like registering for bingo, or finding out about getting rides to doctor's appointments.
Oh no.
Oh,
and they were
yes.
redirected to an adult paid for adult website, huh?
Yep, and it was like that for about 3 or 4 days. They didn't have any IT or anything to help them recover it, and yeah.
Oh no. It just shows that, one little thing. I'm sure that person who set up the FTP was, doing it for a very legitimate purpose, trying to get some information up to the website.
Right.
But again, it just comes back to that. If you set it up, you have to tear it down when you're done if you're not going to be using it any longer, or secure it properly.
Yeah, someone I think even told me that like a local radio station even like told people, like said that it had happened. So then they probably got a bunch of extra traffic, and
I'm sure. Oh well, that's a terrible story.
Oh. Yeah, you got to watch those websites. Web developers do a great job at making fantastic, accessible, pretty websites, but they're not responsible for the back end of maintaining things after it's done usually.
Gotcha. Wow. No. All right. Well, it looks like we've got one more left here. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about World War MFA? Anything involving MFA? I'm always looking for a good story to share the reasons to utilize it.
So this is actually my horror story. This was my nightmare. Myself and another security analyst have been working on a banking Trojan security incident. Emotet was the banking Trojan, and we had been working on it for most of the afternoon and into the night. So it was probably 10 or 11 o'clock at night. We're still at the office working, and we were I believe we were trying to track down what the original email was that dropped the banking Trojan. And the one that we were looking at that point was phishing. So in case you don't know, the way they normally work is that, or the way they used to work at this time, most frequently, was you would get an email, it would have an attachment, it would be usually a Word document. You would open it up, and then a macro embedded in the Word document would then, in the background, go out and get and get files and bring them onto your computer. But the one that we were looking at was actually ended up going to a credential harvester website. So it was not the one we were looking for. But prior to this, we had never encountered one quite like this before. We have what we call a sock puppet account. It's a legitimate email address and password that we put into these or into cred harvesters while we're working in the malware sandbox to figure out what it's going to do. What we call it, detonating it in the malware sandbox. But
gotcha. So this account is it's not used for anything other than this purpose. There's no other files or information attached to it. Right. It was created and it is designed specifically for this purpose of, I've got to feed the credential harvester something, I'm going to feed it this account.
Yep, and we actually have multi-factor authentication enabled on it as well. But the new thing, so we've got the email open in the malware sandbox. We go to the link, we put the credentials in for our sock puppet account. And if you've ever been to our offices before, or probably any security department's offices, we are all allergic to light. We keep the lights off. The only thing you can see is the lovely glow of our monitors, as we are toiling away. And that was the case this evening as well. And there were two of us sitting side by side, looking at the screen, waiting to see if this was going to be the right email that did what we wanted it to do. And I put the credentials in, knowing that it wasn't, but we were going to, follow through anyways, see if there was something else after that. And after I hit the credentials and click the button, my phone vibrates and up on the screen pops the multi-factor authentication for the account. So this was the first time we had encountered a credential harvester that after you put the credentials in, actually was testing them on the back end to see whether those credentials were good and usable. We see this. Yeah, go ahead.
So they literally had some automation built in. So as soon as you put in the credentials, it tried them.
Yeah.
So that if you had been a layman, it would have been normal. You put in your credentials and your multi-factor authentication pops, you click your approve and you're in, the way it normally works.
Yep.
So they're actually trying to find ways to replicate the experience of MFA.
Yeah, and this is a good example too, because all right, if any of you that are on here are IT administrators, you know who your dangerous users are. You know who they are. Just off the top of your head, you could probably say, yes, this person is dangerous, this person is dangerous, this person's dangerous. And more than likely, I can assure you they are probably in accounting and human resources. If you don't think they are, you should look closer at accounting and human resources, because there's always danger in those two departments.
Sorry, accounting and HR folks.
Yeah, it's what, it's not their fault. They open attachments all day long. So what can you do about it? It's, it's
part of their job.
Part of their job, right. Yeah. But if you have people, especially that are in those departments, that are also tend to be your high-risk users when it comes to things like phishing emails, maybe they've had some problems before, maybe you do some testing and they always end up on the naughty list, take away their push notifications. If still have them do MFA, of course, but have them do it where they have to enter the code in, because people will push that approve button sitting on the couch watching TV and nowhere near a piece of electronics other than their phone. What they won't do is they won't stand up, walk over to a computer, go to the website, and then actually try to log in and put the MFA key in if they have to read it from the Microsoft Authenticator app. So remember,
those push notifications are really convenient.
Yes, and they're great for most users.
Yeah, but for those people that abuse the convenience, you may want to switch them, pull the push notifications from them and switch them to the 6-digit code or the PIN number instead.
Yep, absolutely.
Gotcha. Wow. Those are quite some stories, Josh. I really appreciate you sharing those with us. And so I guess one of my last questions for you, though, is what's the scariest thing in cybersecurity for you right now? What's the thing that keeps you up at night and keeps you and your team hopping?
Well, it might not be you might think like one of the Russian hacking groups, like the mummy spider ones, or the ones that do like Emotet, or the TrickBot Trojans, or any of those, but it's not really. I'm actually terrified of this Nigerian phishing group called Scattered Canary, and the reason that they keep me up, well, really, what keeps me up at night is just bad general computer hygiene, password reuse, legacy firewall rules, that kind of stuff, because it's just like it's in the shadows. But when it comes to actually public things you might hear about, that they keep getting better at what they do, and they used to have their set agenda of what and how they would do things, and we've seen them actually adapt on the fly a little bit, which is really unusual, and they're getting good, and I'm worried what that's going to look like when they get really good.
Gotcha. So they're starting to show improvement to the point where it's harder and harder to pick up the tells.
Well, it used to be like, okay, if they were unsuccessful, they just would walk away, and now they're spending more time in people's mailboxes. They're looking through past emails. They're developing a plan just for that specific that specific instance that they're in. They're more convincing. They're more successful in stealing money, and they're getting better at it.
Okay. Which is kind of leads us nicely into the next topics of what can we do about all of this?
Multi-factor authentication.
Thank you, Josh. It's
no problem.
I believe the next slide here, MFA, multi-factor authentication. If it is not on for your key email and work accounts, it should be. Yes. There's really no excuse any longer, is there?
It shouldn't even be an option anymore. We're past that.
Yep.
Multi-factor authentication should just exist.
It just should be the default.
Yes.
So if there's anybody who's on or anyone who's listening to this after the fact, if you take one thing away from this entire presentation, multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, I mean, as a first step, it's probably one of the highest impact steps you can take right now.
And aside from the time commitment, it's not this, the time commitment to set up, it's not this horribly intrusive thing, and nor is it expensive.
It doesn't have to be, no, not at all.
Yeah, and most things have multi-factor authentication, at least in some way, shape, or form, built into them. If they require a username and password, often you can turn on MFA.
And for most organizations, you can't even make the excuse that it's an issue of, oh, it screws up their workflow or anything like that. I mean, you can whitelist known locations.
Right. So if they're logging in from the office, they don't have to use the MFA. So now all of a sudden that productivity argument's pretty well gone.
Yep. I mean, there's some edge cases where individuals, have a lot of remote workplaces, not work from home necessarily, but where they're, job site style stuff.
Gotcha. Or you're true traveling salesmen, not that they're really doing a whole lot of that right now with COVID,
right.
But those people that are on the road 250 days out of the year.
Slightly more burdensome from them, but for those individuals, but still very, very, very low.
Yes. I don't know about you, but it's really not that difficult because I haven't made the dangerous user list, at least to my knowledge, so at ASK. So I still get the push notifications, and tapping that approve is not overly difficult.
You did make the risky user list once.
Wasn't
your fault, though. Almost everyone did.
Oh,
yeah, targeted attempts at logins during the week.
Gotcha. Okay.
You're like number 4 for us.
Oh, lovely.
No successful.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Well, that's MFA.
Conditional access. Yes, that helps too.
All right. Now, a couple of other solutions that I did want to at least bring up and put on the table here is, some form of endpoint protection. Now, this is, a software that sits on the device and protects that device regardless of where it goes. Now, I know that there are some limitations to this protection. This is mainly targeted at malware and ransomware and remediations and protections from those things. But certainly with the slightly more scattered workforce than we even saw a year ago, having protection down to the device level certainly seems to make some sense. Correct, Josh?
Yeah, endpoint protection is a great first step for basically a purchase solution versus, I would say, MFA is pretty much on the free side at this point. It's good because it does go everywhere. They are very advanced in what they're able to identify for like pre-execution detection and things like that. We get a lot of use out of our endpoint tools. When we get a notification from a more advanced system, one of the first steps we're taking is pushing endpoint protection to that device if it doesn't already have it, and then using that to identify anything that's easily identifiable in that system.
Gotcha. So this is more kind of the entry level of the paid for cybersecurity, proactive cybersecurity protections.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to explain it.
Excellent. Okay, and then the last one I want to talk about is I know this is near and dear to your heart. This is the true live monitoring And this is kind of the end game. If correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the end game in cybersecurity, the SIM and SOC technology.
Yeah, there's no end game for us,
Okay.
but this is a great solution. So SIM is essentially a log collection. I mean, it's basically what it is, and plus some, alerting off of it to some degree, and then SOC being people that are then taking those alerts and validating them, and providing, actionable intelligence, or, remediation steps, however you want to think about it.
Gotcha. So in one of your previous examples, like for example, that SIM may have noticed those foreign login attempts on that Office 365 account.
Yeah,
and then alerted the SOC that, hey, there's somebody trying to log in from a different country. Is this legitimate or not? And then the SOC is the people, the security engineers that would review that and say, well, hey, hold on, this is not an international business. There's no reason I would think that somebody be trying to log in from Romania. Let's at least alert on this and take a look at it and see what's going on.
Yeah, we call them restricted country logins. We get alerts for them and take follow-up steps, whether lock the account out, do investigation, etc. But even trying to think even if you have the tool, you have to have the people that are going to use it.
Right.
So
I was talking with someone just the other day who, used to manage, used to be the SOC for an automated SIM. And he said it was overwhelming. He didn't know what alert was real, what alert wasn't. There was far too many reports coming out of the SIM for him ever to track down on his own and chase down and look for root cause and try to resolve the issue. Because if he took one, by the time he started chasing that one down, 50, 60, 70 more alerts popped up. And it became almost unmanageable.
Yeah, and one of the goals of like a security engineer would be to quiet that. But it's a delicate balance. You're trying to quiet the system without losing valid alerts. So
gotcha. It sounds like a very, very narrow tightrope to walk, and one that probably has to be monitored constantly because, as we've talked about earlier today, the threat landscape is ever evolving. Things are ever changing. Yeah, so that quieting of that one alert from 6 months ago, you may not want to quiet that alert anymore today.
Yeah, we're looking at new things every day, and that's because the tactics are changing daily. So the phishing campaigns, we've worked on campaigns that evolved where we believed it was the same threat actor, and over the course of 7 to 10 days, they went through 4, 5, 6 campaigns targeting a single organization. Basically throwing everything at the wall.
Okay, wow. So it's prevalent, it's happening daily, day in, day out. And you get to be right in the middle of all of it.
Yeah, and Endpoint is great. SimSoc, fantastic. You need to feed good data into a SimSoc. There's a lot that can be done in an environment to put good systems in place, strong, secure systems that then, send that data to the SimSoc where you ideally, you still don't want to be getting a bunch of alerts with SimSoc in place. Our goal is to reduce dwell time to as little as possible. Prevention is still, that the good, solid practices internally, whether it's patching to, firewall audits, passwords, all of that stuff, you still have to have that too. It's defense in depth.
Gotcha. All the, policies and procedures, acceptable use, all of that needs to be in place on top of MFA, on top of some form of SimSoc, as you said, layers of defense.
Yep. There's no one thing that's that you can use to solve everything.
Gotcha. Oh, well, folks, with that, certainly we're going to want to thank you all for attending. And Josh, I really want to thank you for your time and your expertise. Those were quite some horror stories you shared. And Hopefully we've been able to share at least some tips and tricks on some things that you can do to reduce your risk levels. And certainly I think that again, the one takeaway that you get is if you don't have MFA on, it should be, and you need to look at how that can be enabled. So if you do one thing at the end of this, that would be the one request that I think Josh and I would both have is if you have accounts that require usernames and passwords and you don't have MFA enabled, find out what it takes to get it enabled and then make sure it does indeed get turned on. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the Q&A, see if we've got any questions in here or any commentary from anyone. Wow, well, Josh, either you and I were incredibly dull or we were very, very thorough, one or the other. So I'm hoping for the latter. I certainly hope it was not the former. As I mentioned at the beginning, I certainly reserve some time afterwards. My contact information is here on the screen. Please feel free to send me an email, give me a call. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. If it's beyond my depth, I'd be happy to bring in someone, Josh or someone from his team, if the conversation needs to go to that level. But once again, I want to thank everyone for attending. I really appreciate you joining us. We'll have another webinar here in a few weeks. We're looking to schedule it, going to give a little bit of a break here, probably look right after the Thanksgiving holiday, do a kind of a recap of 2020 and what we're looking into for 2021. So we'll send out invitations for that, and I really hope you can join us. And again, appreciate you joining us today and hope everyone has a wonderful week. Thank you very much.